If I homeschool my child, are they going to be awkward? If that is a question that you have wondered, and maybe even something that's been holding you back from homeschooling, then I would encourage you to stick with me for these few minutes while we talk about what awkward really means and what you might want to think about when it comes to homeschooling and socialization, that whole big thing that we often hear about in the world of homeschooling. I'm Allison Morrow, founder of GoodSchooling.net, and yes, I will 100% admit that quite often, though not always, homeschoolers can be a little different. But in this video, I want to talk about 3 reasons why that different might be a good thing, and some things that we need to think about when we talk about the whole socialization thing and homeschooling. When we talk about awkward, we have to realize that it's a relative term, right? We can put 2 people next to each other and say, well, this person's more awkward than this one for these reasons and that reasons. But it's not like there is a solid definition where we can tick off boxes and say, yes, you are awkward, and no, you are not. So where does our concept of awkward come from? Well, it comes from what kids are typically like in the public school system. Let's think for a minute about what that system is like. In the public school system, you are ostracized or praised or sought out or bullied because of the music you listen to, or the clothing that you wear, or the way that you talk, or the things that you are interested in. And what we typically think of as a normal teenager or a normal child is going to be skewed by the kind of behavior that we see and the kind of activity that we see from kids in the conventional school system. That system is one in which you are ground down so that you can fit in, right? That whole idea of conformity is a really big one. When you're in public school, you typically don't want to stand out, because what's going to happen if you stand out in the wrong way? You're going to get hammered down. And that hammering could be, it could be a physical thing, right? And so kids, they don't want to be different. They don't want to let on that they, like chess, or that they think chemistry is actually really fun and they kind of like to learn about it on their own on the weekends, right? They're not going to admit to things that other kids or kids in general are going to find weird. And so we see kids look a certain way because they're in this environment that is forcing them to conform. When we homeschool, we take our kids out of that environment, and they're in an environment that says, hey, if you're interested in something, go for it. Learn about it. Let's dive into it. Let's find other people who are interested in this so that you can get together with them and you can learn about it together, or you can do this activity together, whatever it is, right? So it is true that homeschoolers are not exposed to that kind of conformity and that insistence on looking like everybody else. And so what ends up happening? They look like themselves. Homeschoolers, by and large, are not so much awkward as they are individuals. And what is it that we typically tell our kids? March to your own beat. Don't follow the crowd. If everybody jumped off a bridge, would you jump off the bridge too, right? We want our kids to be independent thinkers. We want our kids to be individuals, to be unique, to love the unique things about them and embrace those things and not let the world come and crush that out of them, right? But then we flip around and say, oh, but if you do that, you're being awkward. Does that really make sense? It's not that they're being awkward. Is that they get to be themselves. And all of us can think back to our teenage years, right? And remember how incredibly awkward we felt at everything when you're going through that phase and everything about you is changing, right? Our kids get to do that in the safety of their home and in the safety of a community that typically is much more welcoming and understanding and compassionate and grace giving, so that as our kids are going through that, they're not having to try to hide themselves or be something that they're not. So is it really that those kids are awkward, or is it that they get to be who they actually are? And just like everybody else, they're going to go through a phase of life where they're trying to figure out what that means and how to authentically be themselves. And yes, sometimes looks a little awkward. Another thing that can make homeschool kids seem awkward is this idea that they don't really care who they're talking to. They're just going to go talk. That might be someone who is much younger than them, might be someone who's around the same age as them, but it might also be adults. A lot of times, homeschoolers are very comfortable carrying on full conversations with adults about all manner of things. It might be things that they really don't know a whole lot about, but they're not shy about diving into that conversation anyway. A lot of times these kids have been parts of classes or groups or activities or field trip groups or co-ops, and they've had a lot of interaction with adults, but in a much more casual and social way than kids typically do in public school. A lot of times they're calling those parents by their first name, or like here in the South, you get a lot of, Miss Allison, right? I don't have, like, none of my girls' friends ever called me Mrs. Morrow. And to me, it would feel kind of weird. Like, I'm not Mrs. Morrow. I hang out with you guys. Like, I teach you stuff. I help lead you in these activities. You don't have to call me Mrs. Morrow. I'm Miss Allison. And that's how my girls think about so many different adults in our community. They're people that they have no problem going and having a conversation with. They have no problem, answering questions from them and getting into conversation. And so because of that, can sometimes come off as seeming a little weird. Like, why is this kid talking to me like I'm their friend? Well, because as someone who has been socialized to understand how to interact with people of all different ages and to not necessarily see adults as being these really different and these really, people that we have to be all formal with, they're willing to just go and talk. And so they may look awkward, but it's not so much that they're awkward, it's that they're confident and that they have experience in talking to lots of different people, and it doesn't bother them that you're an adult. If they realize that they have something in common with you, they'll go and talk about that thing. And honestly, when you think about it, that's really cool. And yes, it is true that when we pull our kids out of the conventional school system, sometimes, not always, but sometimes that means that they don't have a whole lot of connection to pop culture, right? So maybe they don't know all the lyrics to the newest Lady Gaga song, or maybe they don't know what the trends in fashion are. Is that really a bad thing? Like, honestly, let's think about this for a minute. Is pop culture so important that we should make sure that our children are able to, rattle off famous actors and famous musicians? Now, there is an argument that if we want our kids to be able to interact with people, there needs to be some common ground. And so that means, yeah, sure, don't necessarily hide them from the culture, but is it the end of the world? Is it really a bad thing if they are not so immersed into pop culture that they aren't super familiar with it all? There's very little in pop culture right now, personally speaking, that I think is worth my children's time. Why would I want to immerse them in that when I know there are so many better things for them to be immersed in? And as homeschoolers who have those values, we find other people who share those values. And so when they get together with their friends, there may be some like, oh, that kid knows more about, music, or this kid knows more about movies or whatever. So what? Right? It gives them something to talk about. It gives them a way for their kids to say, oh, okay, so here's this song. It's really, really good. Let me play it for you. And they get to teach somebody else something, right? Which is kind of fun. It's fun to be the person who's kind of an authority on something. But in the homeschool environment, it's very rare that you're going to see your child ostracized for not knowing those things. Because the homeschool kids all know that stuff's not really all that important. And so when we think about awkward and we realize that a lot of that assumption of awkwardness comes from simply not having, a really deep working knowledge of pop culture, then we can realize maybe that's not such a bad thing. So I hope that I've helped you to think about the whole awkward homeschooler meme in kind of a different way, and to see that that's not necessarily, first of all, what's really going on. It's not so much that they're awkward. And second of all, that it's not really that bad of a thing. In fact, it's a good thing for our kids to be themselves, to be unique, to not be crushed into conformity, to not feel like they have to know the latest fashion or the latest trend or have the newest shoes or have the newest purse in order to be accepted by their peers. When you think about it, yes, homeschooling can come with a lot of challenges. It can come with a lot of sacrifices. But personally, giving my kids an environment to grow up in when they are free to be themselves, when they are surrounded by people who love them for who they are and are going to help them be the best version of themselves, I think that is worth the sacrifice of maybe getting labeled as awkward by people outside of that environment and that community. I think I would take that trade-off any day. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found value here today. Don't forget to hit the like button and hit that notification bell so that you are notified every time we release a new video. I would love to hear what you think. Please go ahead and drop me a comment and tell me what your thoughts are on the awkward homeschooler. Have a great day. I will talk to y'all later. Bye.